Welcome back. The scandal surrounding the Hope Florida Foundation is getting worse, not better. As you hopefully remember, last year the DeSantis administration secretly diverted $10 million from a Medicaid settlement into the Hope Florida Foundation, the group set up to help Casey DeSantis' signature initiative, Hope Florida. Nearly all of that $10 million, however, didn't go to helping the poor and the needy. It ended up in a political action committee controlled by the governor and his then chief of staff, James Uthmeier. And what did they do with the money? Spent it to fight the marijuana initiative. The marijuana initiative failed, and afterwards, Uthmeier was appointed by DeSantis to be Attorney General. Nevertheless, the decision to divert money is facing growing scrutiny. There is a criminal investigation underway by the state attorney in Leon County, and federal investigators are examining payments as well. And as you will hear in a moment, it could end up costing Florida taxpayers millions of dollars. But wait, there is more. This week, for the first time, we are seeing internal emails and other documents that reveal the Medicaid company being forced to pay the $10 million to Hope Florida Foundation didn't want to do it, and that the Attorney General's office at the time was also highly suspicious of the payment. To get a better understanding of what is in these new records, I spoke to Republican State Representative Andrade, who led the House hearings on Hope Florida last year and exposed what is really happening.
You see from these emails that prior to September 10th, no one had the idea of giving any money to Hope Florida out of this settlement. But on September 10th, there was a meeting between ACA executives and the executive office of the governor, either a deputy chief of staff or the chief of staff, who was James Uthmeier at the time, met with ACA and discussed the settlement. And it was the very next day that a donation to Hope Florida was included in the contract.
Well, even more important, it showed also that so many, for years, both Centene and others wanted to get this case resolved. Other law firms that were involved in it wanted to get this resolved, and there was no interest by the state of Florida to move this along until the September just before last year's election. And then there's this sense of urgency where not only does it become a $5 million donation to Hope Florida, but it then suddenly miraculously doubles to $10 million to Hope Florida. But perhaps even more telling to me is the lengths at which both Centene and the then Attorney General's office tried to distance themselves from what the governor's office and ACA were doing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And back to your point about why the settlement hadn't been executed before last September, you see emails from, I believe, 2022, where it was James Uthmeier himself saying he didn't trust the representations from Centene about how much was owed, and the state may prefer to litigate. And as you recall, the $67 million settlement amount has been the offered amount since the very beginning.
But the notion that the attorneys for Centene, as well as the deputy, the Deputy Attorney General, John Gard at the time, he's no longer with the office, but the efforts that both of them went to, in a way, distance themselves from what was happening. I mean, let's talk about Centene first. Centene repeatedly, in the correspondence that has now been released, made clear that they wanted, it made absolutely clear in the record that they were being directed to put this $10 million in there. That this wasn't something they were offering. The governor has referred to it as a cherry on top, something that Centene was eager to do. No, Centene made it clear, this was your idea, not ours. We are being directed, that word directed, to do this. That's significant, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could say Centene essentially made this contribution to the Hope Florida Foundation with a gun to their heads. I mean, they wanted this settlement done. They felt the urgency because I believe Florida was the last state to settle with them on this claim. They wanted to get this done. And so instead of, challenging a full material term, and it became evident that giving these millions of dollars to the Hope Florida Foundation was a material term in order for the governor's office to accept this settlement from Centene. Instead of rejecting that, Centene tried to cover themselves by including liability language, limiting their liability if anyone ever challenged the donation, and making very clear they were being forced to do it by the governor's office and ACA.
And then the Attorney General's office, and I think we need to keep reminding people that this was when Ashley Moody was the Attorney General. Her number two all but said, you know, we'd like to sort of stay out of this. This is the executive branch. This is the governor's office and ACA, the agency, doing this. And he kept trying to take out, it's almost funny if it wasn't so sad, all of these draft agreements they keep sending to him, and he keeps removing references to the Attorney General over and over again in the documents, and then they get sent back, and Centene keeps putting the Attorney General back in because they're trying to figure out, look, the expression is CYA. They're trying to cover their own behinds in all of this, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it was John Gard's first reaction when he saw the idea of giving any money to DSO instead of putting the money back in the state coffers. His first reaction was saying, shouldn't we spell out how much we're going to pay back the feds on these Medicaid dollars? That was his very first response. He knew exactly what the risks were in this situation. And to the point where he told ACA directly he was uncomfortable making any representations as part of this agreement. The Attorney General's office wanted nothing to do with anyone thinking that they were directing this payment, they had any idea or input on making this payment, and they were simply saying, we're going to agree not to sue Centene once this settlement was signed.
Do you still believe that this constitutes money laundering?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is a misuse of Medicaid money. This is money laundering. On top of that, the Hope Florida Foundation is a 501c3 direct support organization that is tied to DCF, a state agency. It's a state agency arm charity, essentially. For him to put them in the position to where they could be subjected to a $2.5 million excise tax because as a 501c3, they can't spend $10 million on campaign activity. The IRS would qualify this as lobbying activity. They can't spend that much. They could spend at most maybe 100, 200 grand. Um, the IRS regulations state that the Hope Florida Foundation could be subjected to a 25% excise tax on any amount they spent in excess of their allowable amount they could spend. So 25% of $9.8 million is what, $2.4 million? The Hope Florida Foundation doesn't have the money to pay that back. For our chief of staff to put them, for the governor's chief of staff at the time, James Uthmeier, to put them in a position to where the state taxpayer might be on the hook for paying the taxes a state charity owns is just galling to me, let alone the fact that we're going to owe about $6 million on this $10 million that James Uthmeier absconded with. We still owe Medicaid the federal share for that amount too. And it's going to be state taxpayers who are footing the bill for that. It'll be nearly $6 million in state taxpayer dollars that are going to have to come up with that we're going to have to come up with to pay the federal government back their share.
You mentioned the potential violation of IRS laws with regard to the Florida Foundation with their 501c3 nonprofit status. Do you have any understanding? Do you get the sense that the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, is actually looking at that, analyzing that, and may go after the foundation?
Yes, I have an understanding that the IRS is looking at it, that CMS, the federal Medicaid program, is looking at it. Again, I'm not in a position to tell you what the ultimate conclusion is going to be. I'm just providing the information about what the outside risks are. I mean, a state DSO could lose its 501c3 status and owe the federal government $2.5 million as an excise tax, all because of the reckless activities of one state government employee, namely James Uthmeier,
who is currently the Attorney General. I saw you recently say that you think Uthmeier either should appoint a special prosecutor, a special counsel to investigate all this, and or resign himself. Do you believe James Uthmeier should resign as Attorney General?
I absolutely think James Uthmeier should resign as Attorney General. He can't, with a straight face, prosecute anyone else for misuse of Medicaid funds, an abuse of public office, an abuse of the public trust. He can't, with a straight face, prosecute a large portion of what the Attorney General's office is expected to go pursue, let alone the fact that we just discovered recently the Attorney General's office at likely the direction of James Uthmeier, egregiously violated the Public Records Act. The Attorney General's office is the one that drafts the manual that tells every other public employee in the state on how to comply with the Public Records Act. And yet recently we saw an instance where the Attorney General's office tried to trade on exclusive access to public records in exchange for preferential treatment or favorable news coverage. I mean, some of this stuff is just it's so galling. You would never expect a public servant to act this way. It's just shocking to me.
I have invited Attorney General James Uthmeier to come on the show. That offer remains. He's welcome anytime. We'll be right back.